Would you stand for the reading of the gospel? From the book of Luke, the 15th chapter, hear what God has to say to you today. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Then there was a young man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have fitted himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer to be worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And you may be seated. When I was a sophomore in college, I was taking a phonetic class, not a phonics class, but a phonetic class. I was a speech therapy major. That's why my Texas dialect is so good. But in this class, every week, we had to turn in at least 7 words that were new to us. And that we'd never seen before. And we had to write the word, write the sentence in which we found the word, and then write it phonetically. And if you don't know about phonetics, there are really a lot of symbols so you know how to pronounce the word correctly. And so, and then we had to turn in this stack of 3x5 cards every week to the professor. Well, one day I was reading something, I don't know what class it was for, but I came across the peripatetic Castro. Do y'all know the word peripatetic? Well, let me tell you what it means one who travels about from place to place. I had never seen that word before. Had not seen that word since until this past week. I follow a fella who is the peripatetic preacher. He's a retired Hebrew Scriptures professor from Perkins School of Theology at SMU in Dallas, Texas. And he's now retired, and he writes this peripatetic, blog or whatever it's called. And he was always so fun to listen to. His name is James Hobart. And he was always so fun to listen to because he was energetic and he loved talking about whatever he was talking about. So I came across the peripatetic preacher who had a commentary on the Joshua scripture for this week. And as I listened to what he said, and as I listened to the scripture and thinking about that word peripatetic, I realized that's what the people in Joshua were. They were traveling from place to place, trying to get to the promised land. And so they were wandering around, and they managed to get to the promised land, and there they were at Gilgal, which is a place of worship. And it's a place God promised that they would get to. And so, as God's voice, Joshua was going to finish what Moses was unable to do. So, on their peripatetic way, they were eating manna. Manna was only available each day. There was none left over at the end of the day. So, by the time they got to Gilgal, they were up to here with manna. And God provided food from the ground there at Gilgal. I also learned, you know what manna means? It means, what is it? It just came from the sky and they ate it. But as we take a look at a larger picture of this, they ate the Passover that day. So the next day there was no manna because they were eating from the produce of the ground. What a wonderful celebration. So they were following what God was telling them to do and calling them to do and be. So this period of Lent for us in the Christian church is a time to remember and to be renewed, like the Israelites, renewed by the food they receive each time they come to worship. And you know, we receive that food each week when we come to worship. We receive the bread and the wine. That is the power that we are given of the presence of Christ in our lives every time we eat it. And when we do that, we can become new people, just like the Israelites. Corinthians also reminds us in the reading today that we can be a new creation when we come into the presence of God. We don't have to move around from place to place. We just have to be present with God where we are. We can be reconciled to God every day here in our homes, wherever we happen to be. Or we can be like the peripatetic son. Sometimes we get anxious and we want to move on and do something else for ourselves, do what we want to do. That young son seemed restless and tired of working on the farm. Reading the scripture, we can assume he came from a wealthy family. He had a big inheritance waiting for him when his father died. Well, who wants to wait around for that inheritance? I want it now. Can't wait, the son said. And I can just hear him say, I'm tired of farming. I need to spread my wings. I need to go see the rest of the world, see how the other half lives. So I'm going to ask for my inheritance and see how the other half lives. So off goes the peripatetic son. The people in Joshua were following God's direction and trusting God to take them to a new land where they could live their lives as God's people. But the young man in Luke just takes off, goes wherever he wants to. Just going by the what am I trying to say? The seat of his pants. Thank you, Max. All of a sudden, it just went out of my brain cells. He wanted to make his own decisions. Perhaps some of us have experienced a child taking off on his or her own way, not sure where the child has gone. I can't imagine if one of our children had decided to do that. I don't think Max would be sitting here today if one of our children did that, not knowing where they are, how they're doing, what they're doing. It's scary. It's a time of worry, worry, worry. Sleepless nights. It makes me wonder what I would do if a child did that to us. So the scripture doesn't tell us what goes on at home while the son has made this decision. And can you just imagine what might be going on? First of all, the scripture says he didn't just come and tell his father and pick up and go. It took him a couple of days maybe to gather up his things. And off he goes to a distant country, the scripture says. He must have had a great time because the scripture said he squandered his property in dissolute living. Whatever that means. Now, for a Jew working with pigs, that was a big no-no. So the son must have gone down as far as he could go. One day, it appears, he woke up and realized a good Jewish boy working with pigs, even eating pigs' food. I better go home. Do we wake up sometime and realize that we're in the wrong place at the wrong time? Do we realize that we're not eating right and do we realize we've gone so far from home that we're miserable, out of step with what we've always known? Do we finally realize we must turn around our peripatetic life and go home? Well, let's just stop for a second. The son decides to go home. What's he going to say when he gets home? Okay, Dad, I've sinned. I'm not worthy to be your son. Let me just be a hired hand in your house. We also have this older son. What about the older son? He stayed at home, worked the land, paid attention to what his father said. He is the child who's done everything right. He'll get the whole farm now that his brother is gone and has taken his share. Whoopee! The older brother may feel pretty sure that what's going to happen with he and his father may feel as though he's the favored one. But wait. Here comes that wayward boy. The wayward son, the lost brother. What? He's coming back and Dad is throwing him a party and excited to greet him. Just look at the way that brother looks. based on how he's dressed and looks, he must have been doing some really dirty work. He also looks like he's devoured Dad's property with prostitutes. How did he know that? What? What's Dad doing? He's running toward that nasty boy. No respectful Jewish man would run. Not even toward his own son. This isn't fair. The father running to welcome his son home. He's running to bring the boy to the party. He's running to kiss him. Dad's running to put the best robe on him. He's running to put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet.
Great I am, immovable rock, omnipotent, powerful, awesome Lord, victorious warrior, commanding King of Kings, mighty conqueror, and the only time I ever saw him run was when he ran to me, took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes, with forgiveness in his voice, he said, "Son, do you know I still love you?" He caught me by surprise when God ran. The day I left home, I knew I'd broken his heart. I wondered then if things could ever be the same. But one night, I remembered his love for me. And down that dusty road ahead I could see it's the only time I ever saw him run. When he ran to me, took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes, with forgiveness in his voice, he said, "Son, do you know I still love you?" It caught me by surprise. It brought me to my knees when God ran. I saw him run to me, and then I ran to him. Holy One, righteous Judge, you turned my way. Now I know he's been waiting for this day. And then he ran to me, took me in his arms, held my head to his chest, said, "My son's come home again," lifted my face, wiped the tears from my eyes.
When have you seen God running at you? Run, God, run! Give me the best you have. When we come to church. Run on behalf of God. Run, God, run to Grace Church. And we want to run and welcome people home. Not just here, but there are plenty of people out there who need God to run at them. God doesn't care what we've done, where we've been. God just wants us home. When God sees us turning around, going a new way, God will run to us, take us in His arms, hold us close to His chest, shout, "My child, I still love you. Come home." God will lift our face and wipe the tears from our eyes. "My child, I love you." God does that all the time. But that's not the end of the parable. The end of the parable is God having a conversation with the older son. If we listen carefully to the ending, we might discover that the older brother was the one who was lost. We might hear the older brother say, "What's the deal, Dad? I've always been here. And you don't even kill a young goat for me to celebrate." The other brother doesn't seem to understand. The older brother doesn't seem to understand the joy the father has when the young son returns. It's the same joy the father has when he takes the older son in his arms, pulls him close, lifts the face of his son as he wipes away his tears and says, "My child, I still love you." Then the father says to the older son, "You have always been with me, and all that I have is yours. So when your brother came back, we had to celebrate." Maybe, just maybe, the father running toward both brothers is the story of this parable. And Lent is the time to consider, to dwell, and allow God to run at us, pull us close, and say, "My child, I still love you." Let's feel God run to us. Run, God, run. Run to someone beyond these walls. Run, God, run to you. Run, God, run to me. Run, God, run. Well, I'm worn out. Run, God, run to all of us. What did I do with my worship guide? Oh, here it is.